Standing before the weathered stones of a medieval castle, it's easy to let your mind wander, to picture knights in shining armor, grand feasts in candlelit halls, or perhaps the echoes of ancient battles. But these walls hold secrets far deeper than fairy tales. What if I told you that every turret, every arch, every towering gatehouse was built not just by royal decree, but by the sweat, ingenuity, and unshakable hope of ordinary people? These storybook castles weren't simply dropped onto the landscape by magic. They were painstakingly carved from the earth itself, stone by stone, by hands that history often forgot. Think about the sheer audacity of it all. In an age without cranes, without blueprints, without modern tools, entire communities came together to achieve the impossible. Imagine the back-breaking labor of quarrymen splitting rocks from the earth, the masons shaping each block with nothing but chisels and patience, the carpenters crafting scaffolds that reached dizzying heights. This wasn't just construction, it was a testament to human determination, a physical manifestation of dreams as towering as the castles themselves. And here's the thing, these structures weren't just fortresses or symbols of power. They were shelters, homes, and beacons of safety in a world where danger lurked beyond every horizon. So how did they do it? How did medieval builders turn raw stone into legends that still stand centuries later? The answers lie in the forgotten techniques, the clever innovations, and the sheer willpower of those who refused to be limited by the technology of their time. Over the next few minutes, we'll peel back the layers of myth and uncover the astonishing reality behind these architectural wonders. You'll discover how castles were born from the marriage of brute strength and delicate artistry, how every groove in the stone tells a story of triumph over adversity, and why, even today, these ancient fortresses continue to stir something deep within us. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a celebration of what humanity can achieve when we dare to dream big. So let's step through the gates together and uncover the true story of how castles were really built. The truth about medieval castles shatters the glossy veneer of storybooks and Hollywood films. Far from being pristine strongholds conjured by kings with a wave of their hand, these fortresses were born from years, sometimes lifetimes, of grueling effort by thousands of unseen hands. Picture this, a single tower might take 20 years to complete, with generations of workers passing through its scaffolding. The stone didn't magically appear, it was hauled from quarries miles away, each block dragged by oxen or floated down rivers on makeshift barges. And those soaring walls, they rose inch by painstaking inch, shaped by masons who spent their entire careers perfecting the art of fitting stone without mortar, relying on nothing but precision and patience. What's even more surprising is who actually built them. While nobles funded these projects, the real labor fell to peasants, skilled craftsmen, and even seasonal workers who traded farm tools for chisels when planting seasons ended. Entire villages mobilized for the cause, with women and children mixing mortar, carting water, or gathering timber. This wasn't just a construction site, it was a bustling ecosystem of collaboration, where survival depended on every person's contribution. And the conditions brutal. Workers braved freezing winters, blistering summers, and constant danger from collapsing scaffolds or falling stones. Many never lived to see the castle finished, their names lost to time while their work endured for centuries. Yet there's a beautiful irony in this. Castles, often symbols of feudal control, were actually monuments to collective resilience. Every groove in the stone tells a story of problem-solving, how carpenters devised cranes from wooden gears and ropes, how masons adjusted designs when supplies ran short, how entire communities adapted to setbacks like sieges or famine. These weren't static monuments, they evolved, grew, and sometimes even failed, revealing the messy, human side of history. So the next time you see a castle, look past the towers and tapestries. See the fingerprints left by the ordinary people who turned impossible dreams into stone. Beneath the weight of every stone in a medieval castle lies something far stronger than mortar hope. These towering structures weren't merely military assets or displays of wealth. They were promises carved in rock, tangible proof that a better future was possible even in the darkest of times. Picture a village under constant threat of raids where families slept with one eye open, knowing danger could arrive at any moment. The moment construction began on a castle, something shifted. The very sight of rising walls sent a message: we refuse to live in fear anymore. For the workers who spent decades hauling stones, hope wasn't some abstract idea. It was the blisters on their hands, the ache in their backs, the knowledge that their children might grow up behind walls that could withstand an army. Every block they placed was a defiance of chaos, a bet that their labor would one day mean safety. And it wasn't just about defense. Castles became hubs of life, places where markets thrived under their shadow, where justice was dispensed in their halls, where festivals turned grim landscapes into places of celebration. The castle's gate didn't just keep threats out, it welcomed opportunity in. What's truly remarkable is how this hope transcended class. Lords may have commissioned these projects, but it was the collective belief of ordinary people that brought them to life. When a drought withered crops or a harsh winter froze the land, the castle's construction site became a rare source of steady work and wages. For many, it was more than a job, it was a lifeline. Even the craftsmen, often itinerant workers moving from project to project, carried this hope with them. A master mason might spend his life perfecting arches and towers, knowing his skill would outlive him, that generations he'd never meet would marvel at what his hands had built. This shared purpose transformed construction sites into something almost sacred. Legends tell of workers placing personal tokens, coins, tools, even carved symbols into the walls as hidden blessings. These weren't just superstitions, they were acts of faith, quiet prayers that the strength they poured into the stone would endure, and endure it did. Centuries later, we still trace our fingers over those very walls, feeling the echoes of that hope. It's a reminder that the greatest human creations aren't just made of materials. They're forged from the belief that together we can build something worthy of the future. Consider the sheer weight of a single castle stone, some as heavy as 2,000 pounds, and then imagine moving hundreds, even thousands of them without modern machinery. That was the daily reality for medieval builders, whose first challenge wasn't design or defense, but something far more fundamental: sourcing the very bones of the castle from the land itself. Quarries became the unsung heroes of these projects, often hidden in hillsides or riverbanks, where workers used iron wedges and hammers to split bedrock into manageable blocks. But here's the twist: the stone's journey had only just begun. Transporting these colossal slabs required ingenuity on an epic scale. Oxen strained against wooden sledges, carts groaned under loads that cracked axles, and in some cases, teams floated stones down rivers on rafts lashed together with rope, a delicate operation where one wrong move could send months of labor sinking to the bottom. And stone was just one piece of the puzzle. Forests supplied the timber, not just for beams and floors, but for the intricate scaffolding that wrapped around rising walls like wooden lace. Carpenters selected oak not for its beauty, but for its stubborn resistance to rot, knowing these hidden supports would bear the weight of history. Then there was mortar, mixed in vast pits by workers who combined lime, sand, and water in precise ratios, sometimes adding crushed pottery or animal hair to strengthen the bond. Every ingredient had to be local. Hauling materials over long distances was a luxury few could afford. This limitation sparked creativity. Builders in chalk-rich regions crafted entire foundations from compacted rubble, while volcanic areas like the Rhineland used porous basalt to insulate against damp. The land didn't just supply materials, it shaped the castle's very identity. Regional quirks tell a fascinating story of adaptation. In England's Cotswolds, honey-colored limestone gave castles a golden glow, while Welsh fortresses often rose from jagged slate, their surfaces shimmering like dragon scales in the rain. Contrast that with France's Loire Valley, where creamy tuffeau stone so soft it could be carved with woodworking tools allowed for elaborate details that harder rocks would never permit. These choices weren't just aesthetic, they were survival. A castle built from brittle sandstone might crumble under bombardment, while one made of granite could withstand centuries of sieges. Builders became masters of reading the land, turning geological constraints into architectural triumphs. Yet perhaps the most overlooked material was time. Seasons dictated everything. Quarrying halted when winter froze the ground, logging peaked in autumn when sap receded from the wood, and mortar mixing paused during heavy rains. Builders weren't just fighting against gravity, they were racing the calendar, and when supplies ran short, they improvised. Crumbled ruins of older Roman buildings were pillaged for ready-cut stone, a practice so common that medieval walls often hide fragments of ancient statues or inscriptions, repurposed without ceremony. This wasn't recycling, it was survival, a testament to the pragmatism that turned castles from dreams into unshakable reality. So the next time you admire a castle's grandeur, look closer. Those weathered stones are more than just rock. They're a ledger of human resourcefulness, each chip and groove a silent record of the hands that wrested order from the chaos of the natural world. While kings and nobles took credit for castles, the real architects of these marvels were the calloused hands of laborers whose names history rarely recorded. Picture a construction site buzzing with activity, not with the mechanical roar of modern machinery, but with the rhythmic clang of chisels, the creak of wooden pulleys, and the collective grunts of men hauling stones twice their weight. At the heart of it all were the stonemasons, the elite craftsmen who transformed rough rock into precision-fitted masterpieces. Their skill was so revered they often worked under special contracts, exempt from feudal duties, and some even left secret masons' marks on the stones, a humble signature saying, "I was here." But masons couldn't work alone. Blacksmiths kept the site running, hammering out nails, hinges, and tools on makeshift forges, their fires burning late into the night. Carpenters, the unsung engineers of their day, built everything from scaffolding to siege engines, their wooden frameworks rising like skeletons around the stone. And then there were the haulers, the muscle behind the operation. Many were peasants fulfilling compulsory labor days, known as corvée, their backs bent under the weight of materials, their payment often just a meal and a roof over their heads for the season. What's often forgotten is how many of these workers were women and children. While historical accounts focus on men, records show women mixing mortar, weaving ropes, and even managing supply lines. Children fetched water, gathered straw for insulation, or carried tools. Apprenticeship started young in a world where survival depended on contribution. In winter, when fieldwork ceased, entire families might migrate to castle sites, turning construction into a seasonal lifeline. The work was brutal. A single misstep could send a stone tumbling from scaffolding, crushing limbs or lives. Yet guilds and informal networks provided unexpected solidarity. Masons shared techniques across regions, their knowledge passed down like folklore. laborers developed rituals, like placing a coin or a personal totem in the mortar, to bless the walls they'd never see finished. These weren't just workers, they were believers in a collective vision, stitching their hopes into the very fabric of the castle. And here's the twist: while feudal systems demanded their labor, many workers leveraged castle building to climb social ladders. Skilled artisans could earn enough to buy land or educate their children. Some masons became so indispensable they negotiated higher wages or even refused to work in unsafe conditions, an early flicker of workers' rights. Their legacy isn't just in the stones they laid, but in the quiet defiance that even in an age of rigid hierarchy, skill and perseverance could bend the rules. So when you walk through a castle's gate today, remember, it wasn't just built for kings. It was built by kings of craft whose hands turned sweat and patience into immortality. The tools of medieval builders might seem primitive by today's standards, but their simplicity masked extraordinary sophistication. Picture a stonemason's tool kit: iron chisels hardened in charcoal fires, wooden mallets bound with leather, and compasses made from nothing more than string and bone. With these humble instruments, craftsmen achieved precision that would challenge modern engineers. A master mason could split a boulder along its natural grain with nothing but a well-placed iron wedge and a series of calculated hammer blows, revealing smooth faces that needed minimal finishing. This wasn't brute force, it was an intimate dance between human intuition and the secrets hidden within the stone itself. Lifting those stones required equal parts muscle and mechanics. Wooden cranes, powered by massive treadwheels turned by laborers walking inside like human hamsters, could hoist multi-ton blocks hundreds of feet into the air. Ropes woven from hemp or willow bark, soaked in tar to resist fraying, supported weights that defied logic. The genius lay in the details. A system of wooden gears allowed a single operator to control the crane's movement with surprising delicacy, positioning stones within a finger's width of perfection. And when cranes couldn't reach, builders devised ramps of compacted earth, spiraling upward as the walls grew, their slopes precisely calculated to balance effort against stability. Construction techniques reveal even more clever adaptations. The rubble core method, filling thick walls with loose stones and mortar, wasn't just a shortcut, it was structural brilliance. Outer layers of finely cut ashlar stone created a weatherproof shell, while the inner rubble absorbed shocks from earthquakes or siege engines. In Wales, builders mixed horsehair into mortar to prevent cracking, while Scandinavian castles used layers of birch bark as waterproofing between stones. Every region developed its own tricks, passed down through generations like closely guarded recipes. Perhaps most impressive was how builders experimented without formal engineering knowledge. When a tower leaned perilously, they didn't tear it down, they compensated by thickening opposite walls or adding hidden buttresses. Arches were reinforced with iron bars heated and bent into place, an early form of reinforcement we'd now call rebar. Trial and error became their textbook, and the proof of their success stands in castles that have weathered 800 years of storms, wars, and neglect. These builders didn't just work with stone, they conversed with it, learning its language through calloused hands and patient observation, turning limitations into innovations that still leave us in awe today. Before a single stone could be laid for the walls, medieval builders faced their most crucial test, taming the very earth beneath their feet. The foundation of a castle wasn't just the first step. It was the make-or-break moment that determined whether the structure would stand for centuries or crumble before the roof was even raised. Imagine teams of laborers digging trenches deeper than a man's height, their shovels striking stubborn clay or bedrock, their progress measured in back-breaking inches. These weren't simple ditches, they were the hidden embrace that would cradle the castle's weight. and every scoop of soil had to be replaced with something far stronger. The secret: layers upon layers of compacted rubble, crushed stone, broken pottery, even charred timber, all painstakingly pressed into place with wooden rammers. This wasn't random debris, it was engineered fill, designed to drain water and distribute weight like a sponge beneath a giant's foot. In marshy areas, builders drove oak pilings deep into the soft ground, their tips charred to resist rot, creating a forest of hidden stilts. And when they hit groundwater, they didn't retreat, they innovated. Some sites reveal intricate networks of drainage channels lined with flat stones, diverting water away before the first foundation block was set. Precision was everything. Using nothing but knotted ropes and wooden levels, crews ensured the base was perfectly flat, sometimes spending months adjusting the grade by hand. A slope of even a few inches could spell disaster when the walls reached their full height, causing towers to lean or mortar joints to crack under uneven pressure. The foundation stones themselves were no afterthought, massive blocks, often wider than the walls they supported, laid in interlocking patterns to spread the load. In coastal castles like Dover, these footings were set in molten lead for extra stability, a lavish solution reserved for the most critical locations. But perhaps the most astonishing feat was how builders adapted to the land's personality. On rocky hilltops, they carved foundations directly into the living stone, creating a seamless bond between castle and mountain. In sandy regions, they buried woven mats of willow branches beneath the rubble to prevent shifting, and when time was short, like during wartime, they sometimes built atop the ruins of older fortifications, turning the rubble of defeat into the backbone of new strength. Every foundation tells a story of problem-solving, a testament to the humility of builders who knew their grandest designs were only as stable as the ground they trusted to hold them. What's easy to overlook is how these invisible efforts shaped the castle's fate. A well-laid foundation could endure sieges, earthquakes, and centuries of neglect, while a rushed job might doom a fortress before the first enemy arrow flew. The true marvel isn't just that these techniques worked, it's that they were perfected through observation and patience, long before the word engineering even existed. So the next time you walk through a castle gate, remember, the real magic isn't in the towering walls or the soaring arches. It's in the silent, stubborn wisdom buried beneath your feet. Rising like a sheer cliff face from the earth, castle walls were far more than simple barriers. They were psychological fortresses designed to daunt attackers before a single arrow was loosed. The outer layer, crafted from finely cut ashlar stone, presented an unbroken facade of polished might, but behind that imposing mask lay a clever secret. Builders filled the interior with rough rubble bound by mortar, creating a sandwich of stability that was both cost-effective and surprisingly resilient. This layered approach absorbed the punishing blows of siege engines better than solid stone, dispersing the force like a padded armor beneath steel plates. Towers punctuated these walls like stone sentinels, each one a marvel of multi-purpose design. Their circular shape wasn't just for grandeur, it deflected projectiles more effectively than square towers, which were vulnerable to having corners shattered by battering rams. Inside, spiral staircases always turned clockwise as they ascended, forcing right-handed attackers to fight uphill with their sword arms cramped against the central column. But these towers weren't just war machines. Their height served as a constant visual reminder of a lord's reach, visible for miles across the countryside. Some contained private chambers where nobles could survey their lands like eagles in a nest, blending domestic luxury with military dominance. Every inch of these walls bristled with defensive innovations. Arrow slits, those narrow vertical openings, weren't random gaps but carefully engineered kill zones. Their hourglass shape allowed archers inside to pivot and aim across a wide field while presenting barely a target to enemies outside. Higher up, murder holes dotted the ceilings of gate passages, ready to rain down boiling oil or crushing stones on anyone breaching the outer defenses. Even the walkways along the tops of walls, called parapets, had cunning features. The outer edge often dipped lower than the inner side, creating a protected shooting platform where defenders could crouch while reloading. What's often overlooked is how these walls adapted to their environments. Coastal castles like Wales' Conway had salt-resistant mortar mixed with crushed seashells, while desert fortresses in Spain incorporated shaded overhangs to cool the stone. Some walls contained hidden passages, thin corridors within their thickness where scouts could move undetected or defenders could pour sand through small openings to smother fires set against the gates. The greatest illusion, many walls appeared far taller than they actually were. Builders sloped the bases outward in a battering curve, making scaling ladders tilt dangerously away while giving the impression of impossible height from below. These weren't static monuments but evolving systems. As siege technology advanced, walls grew thicker, some reaching 20 feet or more, and were reinforced with protruding bastions that allowed flanking fire. The introduction of gunpowder saw walls lower and slope outward to deflect cannonballs, marking the end of the towering medieval aesthetic. Yet even in their twilight, these walls stood as testaments to human ingenuity, their every curve and crevice whispering stories of the minds that turned stone into both shield and spectacle. Towering above the rest of the castle, the keep wasn't just a building. It was the beating heart of medieval power, a fortress within a fortress. Early keeps began as simple wooden towers perched atop earthen mounds, quick to build but vulnerable to fire. But as threats grew, so did their ambition. By the 12th century, these wooden skeletons had transformed into hulking stone giants, their walls thick enough to swallow entire staircases within their depths. The iconic square design, like the White Tower of London, wasn't just for grandeur, it sent a message of unshakable authority, a geometric declaration of control over the chaotic landscape. Step inside, and you'd find a vertical village squeezed into stone. The ground floor often housed storerooms crammed with grain, salted meat, and weaponry enough to outlast months of siege. Above, the Great Hall dominated, where feasts roared under torchlight and justice was dispensed from a lord's raised dais. But this wasn't just a space for revelry. In wartime, tables were cleared to make room for wounded soldiers, and the hall's high windows doubled as lookout posts. Higher still lay the solar, the lord's private chamber, where thick tapestries fought back drafts and narrow alcoves hid precious scrolls or relics. Even religion had its place. Tiny chapels were tucked into spiral staircases or corner turrets, their altars facing east toward Jerusalem. Every inch served multiple purposes, blending domestic comfort with military necessity. The keep's evolution reveals a fascinating arms race between defense and daily life. Early rectangular designs gave way to circular keeps, like Conisbra's haunting cylindrical tower, which eliminated blind spots for archers. Some incorporated blind arches, decorative stonework that secretly strengthened load-bearing walls. Others featured ingenious murder pits beneath staircases, where attackers could be trapped and ambushed from hidden hatches. Yet amid these grim details, traces of domesticity lingered. Fireplaces grew more elaborate, window seats offered rare sunlight for reading, and garderobes, medieval toilets, were cleverly vented through outer walls. This wasn't just a stronghold, it was a carefully calibrated machine for living under threat. What's often overlooked is how keeps mirrored the social hierarchy. Servants toiled in the dim basements, nobles occupied the middle floors, and the roof crowned with battlements belonged to the watchmen whose eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. The higher you climbed, the more privileged the space, a literal stratification of medieval society in stone. Yet in crisis, these divisions collapsed. When enemies breached the outer walls, everyone from baker to baron crowded into the keep's uppermost floors, drawing up ladders behind them like turtles retreating into shells. The keep's final lesson: in the Middle Ages, safety was always vertical. The farther you could rise above danger, the longer you might survive. Perhaps no feature captures this duality better than the keep's roof. From outside, it bristled with defensive crenellations, but inside, it often held a surprise private gardens where herbs were grown for medicine or roses for courtly love tokens. Even in their most militarized spaces, medieval people carved out pockets of normalcy, a reminder that castles weren't just about war. They were about enduring it and preserving some shred of home while the world outside burned. The castle gate wasn't just an entrance, it was the ultimate choke point where invaders faced a gauntlet of calculated horrors. Step too close and the ground itself might betray you. Many gatehouses sat atop hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes, concealed beneath wooden planks designed to collapse under the weight of armored men. Those who survived the fall would find themselves trapped in a stone-lined kill box, with arrows raining from slits in the walls above and boiling liquids pouring through murder holes in the ceiling. This wasn't just defense, it was psychological warfare, engineered to make attackers question every footstep. Portcullises added another layer of dread: massive iron or timber grills that could drop in an instant, splitting assault forces in two. Operated by hidden winches in chambers above, some were weighted with counterbalances so heavy they could crush a man instantly. Behind them, thick oak gates reinforced with iron bands often bore a small, barred opening called a wicket gate. Far from a design flaw, this was a trap. Invaders who squeezed through would find themselves isolated in a killing zone, cut off from reinforcements while defenders picked them off at leisure. But the true genius lay in the gatehouse's layered design. Some, like the towering example at Caernarfon Castle, contained multiple portcullises and gates in sequence, forcing attackers to fight through a series of confined spaces where their numbers meant nothing. Archers in flanking towers could fire along murder alleys, narrow passages where enemies were funneled into perfect shooting galleries. Even the drawbridge was a weapon. When raised, it became an additional barrier. When lowered, its underside might be studded with spikes to impale those trying to crawl beneath. The most formidable gatehouses doubled as self-sufficient strongholds. Dover Castle's colossal entrance had its own well, barracks, and storerooms, capable of housing dozens of defenders for weeks if the outer walls fell. Staircases spiraled upward in tight, defensive turns, while hidden sally ports allowed counterattacking forces to slip behind besiegers. Every architectural choice served dual purposes. The vaulted ceilings that distributed weight also amplified the echoes of approaching footsteps, and the decorative carvings near arrow slits distracted attackers from the deadly apertures beside them. What's often overlooked is how these structures evolved alongside siege technology. Early Norman gatehouses were relatively simple, but as battering rams and siege towers improved, so did the defenses. By the 14th century, some gatehouses featured bent entrances, sharp turns that prevented rams from gaining momentum, or outer barbicans that lured attackers into exposed courtyards before they even reached the main gate. The message was clear: crossing the threshold wasn't just difficult, it was a descent into a carefully orchestrated nightmare where the castle itself became an active participant in the battle. Yet for all their lethality, gatehouses also held symbolic power. Their grandeur announced a lord's might to visitors, while the coat of arms carved above the arch served as a permanent reminder of who controlled this razor's edge between safety and slaughter. Passing through unharmed required permission, a humbling lesson for friend and foe alike. So the next time you walk under a castle's arch, look up. Those grooves in the stone aren't just weathering, they're the scars of 1,000 calculated near misses where architecture and ambush became one. Moats were the castle's first line of defense, but not in the way you might think. Far from simple water-filled trenches, these barriers came in as many variations as the castles they protected. Picture a dry moat, a deep, steep-sided ditch carved into the earth, its bottom studded with rows of sharpened wooden stakes called chevaux de frise. These weren't just obstacles, they were traps designed to impale charging cavalry or break the momentum of siege towers. Yet other moats turned nature into an ally, redirecting rivers or expanding existing marshes to create shimmering belts of protection. The water itself became a weapon too deep to wade, too murky to gauge depth, and often deliberately kept free of vegetation to deny attackers cover. But moats weren't just about defense. Some served as private fisheries, stocked with carp or pike to supplement the castle's food supply during sieges. Lords in Flanders even installed floating duck houses, turning their moats into sustainable larders. The reflective surface of water also had a psychological effect. It doubled the apparent height of castle walls when viewed from afar, making fortresses seem even more imposing. And let's not forget the unexpected perk of sanitation. Water moats acted as natural sewage channels, carrying waste away from living quarters while deterring tunnel-digging sappers who might otherwise burrow under walls. Construction was a feat of medieval hydraulics. Teams of laborers, sometimes prisoners of war, dug trenches by hand, shaping their slopes at precise angles to prevent collapse. In rocky terrain, they used fire and vinegar to fracture stone, a technique borrowed from ancient miners. Water-filled moats required even more ingenuity, with systems of sluice gates and canals maintaining levels despite droughts or floods. Some castles, like Bodiam in England, created the illusion of an island fortress by flooding the surrounding meadow, though recent archaeology suggests its moat may have been more decorative than defensive, a status symbol mirroring the owner's wealth. The true brilliance of moats lay in their adaptability. In colder climates, they froze solid in winter, but this wasn't the vulnerability it seems. Defenders would deliberately weaken sections of ice near walls, creating deadly traps for overconfident attackers. Arid regions like Spain's Castile developed dry moats filled with loose gravel that shifted underfoot, slowing advances to a crawl, and perhaps most surprising, some moats contained hidden causeways, narrow, submerged paths known only to defenders, allowing surprise sorties against besiegers. What began as a practical defense evolved into a statement of power. The wider the moat, the more land a lord could commandeer for his safety. Some French chateaux boasted moats so expansive they resembled ornamental lakes, their surfaces shimmering with imported swans. This wasn't just vanity, it was theater, a calculated display meant to awe visitors before they crossed the drawbridge. From deadly traps to floating gardens, moats proved that medieval minds saw possibilities where we might only see a ditch, transforming humble earth and water into one of history's most versatile fortifications. Castles were the beating hearts of medieval life, far more than silent stone sentinels looming over the countryside. Picture a typical market day. The outer bailey transformed into a bustling arena where farmers hawked fresh produce, craftsmen displayed wares under brightly colored awnings, and traveling merchants unloaded exotic spices from distant land. These weren't occasional events, they were the lifeblood of local economies. Lords collected taxes on every transaction, but in exchange, they provided something priceless: security. The castle's shadow meant protection from bandits, ensuring traders could operate without fear. Over time, these informal gatherings evolved into chartered towns, their layout still echoing the radial streets that once fanned out from the castle gates like spokes on a wheel. Justice also flowed from these stone fortresses. The Great Hall doubled as a courtroom where disputes were settled under the watchful gaze of the lord or his steward. Punishments ranged from fines paid in grain to the dreaded stocks erected in the courtyard. But the system wasn't just about retribution. Castles stored vital records, land deeds, marriage contracts, tax rolls, making them medieval archives where order was literally set in stone. Even the castle's physical presence influenced behavior. Simply knowing that watchmen patrolled the ramparts discouraged crime for miles around, creating pockets of stability in an otherwise turbulent world. Yet castles weren't just tools of control, they were instruments of opportunity. Skilled workers flocked to construction sites, knowing steady work awaited them for years. Enterprising villagers sold food and ale to laborers, while masons and carpenters trained apprentices, passing down trades that lifted families out of poverty. The castle's demand for resources, stone, timber, iron spurred local industries, turning sleepy hamlets into thriving suppliers. And when famine or war struck, the castle's storerooms became communal lifelines, though access often depended on loyalty. The landscape itself bowed to the castle's influence. Roads snaked toward their gates by design, ensuring lords could monitor and tax traveling goods. Mills and forges clustered nearby, powered by streams diverted to feed the moat. Over generations, this gravitational pull reshaped entire regions, with some castles spawning cities that outlasted their original purpose. Take Edinburgh, where the castle's volcanic perch still dictates the city's skyline, or Carcassonne, where modern streets trace the contours of medieval defenses. What's most striking is how castles balanced opposites. They were both shields and open doors, symbols of oppression and beacons of community. A lord might host lavish feasts in the Great Hall one day and mete out harsh justice the next. Peasants resented the taxes but relied on the protection. This duality made castles the ultimate feudal compromise, imposing enough to command respect, yet vital enough to earn their place in daily life. Their true power wasn't in their walls, but in how they wove themselves into the very fabric of society, threads of stone and purpose that held the medieval world together. When the first trebuchet stone crashed against a castle wall, it wasn't just rock meeting rock. It was the beginning of a brutal conversation between attacker and defender, one that would reshape castles forever. Siege warfare turned these stone giants into pressure chambers of innovation, where every assault revealed weaknesses and every survival sparked redesign. Take the 1204 siege of Château au-Gaillard, Richard the Lionheart's impregnable fortress. French forces didn't just batter the walls, they exploited a fatal flaw, an overlooked latrine chute that became a secret passage. Soldiers wriggled through the filth to unlock gates from within, proving that even the mightiest castles could fall to mundane oversights, but defenders weren't passive victims. The art of countermining turned castle grounds into underground battlegrounds. When attackers dug tunnels to collapse walls, castle garrisons dug their own intersecting passages, listening for pickaxes with ear pressed to soil. The moment they breached an enemy tunnel, chaos erupted. Flaming pitch barrels rolled into the darkness, or sudden floods drowned sappers where they stood. At Rochester Castle in 1215, defenders held out for months by collapsing a corner tower onto King John's miners, sacrificing part of their fortress to save the whole. Starvation was the slowest siege weapon, but castles had culinary tricks to stretch sieges into endurance contests. Dry moats doubled as hidden gardens for quick-growing vegetables, while cisterns harvested rainwater long after besiegers' canteens ran dry. Some keeps housed dovecotes not for sentiment but for fresh meat, and grain stores were deliberately placed high in towers where damp couldn't rot them. Psychological warfare thrived too. Defenders might toss freshly baked bread over walls to mock starving attackers, or stage fake feasts using the same roasted ox repeatedly, a medieval special effect to break enemy morale. The trebuchet's arrival forced the most dramatic changes. These wooden beasts could hurl stones weighing over 300 pounds, but castles adapted. Builders began layering soft materials like clay or sand between stone courses to absorb shocks, creating walls that flexed rather than shattered. After the Mongols used gunpowder against European forts in the 1240s, builders thickened walls at the base, angling them to deflect cannonballs, a shift that birthed the squat, sloping bastions of the Renaissance. Every siege became a live test, with surviving castles incorporating the lessons into their very bones. Perhaps no siege better showcases this evolution than Malta's Great Siege of 1565. Though technically a gunpowder-era conflict, the Knights Hospitaller used medieval castle principles to withstand months of Ottoman bombardment. They'd line their walls with wool bales to cushion impacts, and when sections collapsed, defenders fought from the rubble itself, turning each breach into a kill zone. The Ottomans ultimately retreated, proving that even against cannons, castles could win if their defenders had the grit to match their stone. What makes these sieges remarkable isn't just the violence, but the feedback loop they created. Attackers invented new horrors, defenders engineered smarter designs. Castles that survived became textbooks in stone, their scars mapping the trajectory of medieval warfare. Those that fell served as warnings not of weakness, but of the relentless ingenuity that turns every defeat into a blueprint for tomorrow's fortress. The thunder of cannons didn't just breach castle walls, it shattered an entire way of life. By the 15th century, gunpowder had rewritten the rules of warfare, rendering towering stone fortresses as vulnerable as sandcastles against the tide. A single well-placed cannonball could topple a wall that had stood unshaken for centuries, and suddenly, the mighty symbols of feudal power found themselves on the wrong side of history. But castles didn't vanish overnight. Instead, they embarked on a surprising second act, transforming from instruments of war into something far more complex: monuments to memory, luxury, and even artistic imagination. Some lords refused to abandon their ancestral strongholds, but they couldn't ignore the new reality. The solution: reinvention. Across Europe, castles underwent dramatic makeovers, their crenellations smoothed into elegant balustrades, arrow loops widened into sunlit windows, and grim gatehouses refashioned as grand entrances worthy of a palace. Take England's Kenilworth Castle. Once a formidable fortress, it became a lavish Elizabethan show home, complete with ornamental gardens and a pleasure ground for Queen Elizabeth I. The message was clear: power no longer needed thick walls to impress. It could dazzle with marble fountains and imported tapestries instead. Others weren't so lucky. Stripped of military value, many castles were slighted, deliberately dismantled by victorious armies to prevent future rebellions. Their stones became quarries for nearby villages, repurposed into cottages, churches, and bridges. A stroll through the English countryside reveals farmhouse walls embedded with unmistakable castle masonry, their former grandeur now holding up barns. Yet even in ruin, these skeletons held power. Romantic poets like Wordsworth and painters like Turner flocked to their broken arches, seeing not decay but a melancholic beauty. The ivy-clad remnants of Tintern Abbey or the skeletal towers of Dunstanburgh became canvases for a new ideal: the sublime ruin. where nature's reclaiming touch seemed more poetic than tragic. The castle's afterlife took stranger turns. Some became prisons, their impenetrable walls now keeping people in rather than out. Others morphed into tourist attractions centuries before the concept existed. By the 1700s, intrepid travelers were sketching crumbling keeps in their journals, while Gothic novelists like Walpole used them as backdrops for tales of mystery and horror. The Victorians took this fascination further, restoring castles with a heavy dose of fantasy, adding faux medieval turrets to Warwick, or rebuilding Neuschwanstein from scratch as a fairy tale confection. These weren't accurate recreations, they were mirrors reflecting what each era wanted to believe about the past. Perhaps the most unexpected twist, castles found renewed purpose in modern conflicts. During World War II, Dover's medieval tunnels housed secret command centers, while Polish partisans used crumbling fortress walls as hideouts against Nazi occupiers. Even today, castles serve as museums, hotels, and film sets, their stones whispering not just of knights and sieges, but of the endless human talent for finding new meaning in old bones. The age of castles as military tools may have ended, but their story never really stopped. It just changed shape, proving that some ideas, like the dreams we build in stone, are far harder to destroy than walls. Crossing the English Channel into Wales, you'd encounter castles that look like stone puzzles, layers of walls within walls, each one taller than the last. These concentric masterpieces, like Beaumaris or Caernarfon, weren't just built for war, they were psychological chessboards. Attackers who breached the outer curtain wall would find themselves trapped in a killing zone, exposed to arrows from every angle. The design wasn't just Welsh ingenuity, it was borrowed from Crusader castles in the Holy Land, adapted to the damp cliffs of Snowdonia. But what truly set these fortresses apart was their use of local stone. The striped masonry of Caernarfon's walls, alternating between light sandstone and dark volcanic rock, wasn't just decorative, it was a bold statement of Edward I's dominance, built from the very bones of the Welsh landscape he sought to control. Venture into France and the aesthetic shifts dramatically. While English castles were built to intimidate, French châteaux like Chambord or Chenonceau were designed to dazzle. Towering spires, ornamental moats, and sprawling gardens turned fortresses into palaces, their delicate Renaissance details masking their military origins. This wasn't just vanity, it was politics. In a kingdom where royal authority often hinged on spectacle, a lord's power was measured by the grace of his arches as much as the thickness of his walls. Yet even here, regional quirks emerged. Normandy's castles like Falaise clung to stark Norman keeps, their rough-hewn strength a reminder of Viking roots. Meanwhile, the Loire Valley's soft tuffeau stone allowed for intricate carvings that would crumble in harder climates, proof that geology could shape ambition. Germany's hilltop castles tell a different story entirely. Perched on craggy peaks like Berg Eltz or Neuschwanstein, though the latter is a romantic-era fantasy, these fortresses seem to grow straight from the rock. Their tall, slender towers weren't just for show, they were early warning systems, leveraging elevation to spot enemies miles away. But the real genius lay in their adaptability. Many German castles were built as Gannerbenbergen, jointly owned by feuding families who partitioned the space like a stone apartment complex. Staircases spiraled in opposite directions to avoid awkward encounters, while private chapels and wells ensured each clan could survive a siege even from their neighbors. Scotland's answer to castle building was the Tower House, a no-nonsense vertical fort where every floor had a purpose. From the vaulted storerooms of the basement to the Lord's Chamber at the top, these compact giants like Craigievar or Castle Campbell maximized defense in a land where clan rivalries demanded constant vigilance. The walls sloped inward to repel climbing attempts, while tiny windows barely more than arrow slits kept out both enemies and the relentless highland wind. Yet even in austerity, beauty crept in. Intricate corbelling supported projecting turrets, and heraldic carvings above doorways whispered of pride as much as protection. Spain's castillos reflect the fiery clash of cultures that shaped the peninsula. In Andalusia, the Alcazar of Seville blends Islamic mosaics with Gothic arches, a physical chronicle of Reconquista and coexistence. Up north, the brutal simplicity of castles like Olite speaks to frontier life, where quick construction mattered more than ornament. But the true outliers are Portugal's coastal fortresses, like Sintra's Palacio do Pina, where Moorish battlements meet candy-colored towers, proof that even in defense, there's room for whimsy. What unites these regional styles isn't just stone or strategy, it's storytelling. Every curve of a turret, every choice of material, whispers of the people who built them. Welsh princes resisting conquest, French nobles flaunting their refinement, German barons balancing rivalry with pragmatism. Castles weren't just buildings, they were frozen dialogues between the land and those who sought to master it. So the next time you see a castle, don't just look at its walls, listen. They're telling you secrets in the language of geography, politics, and sheer human stubbornness. From the misty halls of Camelot to the jagged towers of Dracula's lair, castles have long been more than mere stone and mortar. They're the bedrock of our collective imagination. Long after their military relevance faded, these fortresses found a second life in stories, becoming canvases for our deepest fears and grandest dreams. Consider the legends of King Arthur, where Camelot's shining spires symbolized an ideal society, its round table a metaphor for unity in a fractured world. Or Bran Castle in Transylvania, forever tied to Bram Stoker's Dracula despite the historical Vlad the Impaler never setting foot there. These fictional castles didn't just borrow from reality, they rewrote it, turning cold stone into vessels for myth. The Romantic era sparked a wildfire of castle obsession. Poets like Wordsworth saw crumbling ruins not as signs of defeat, but as portals to a nobler past. Sir Walter Scott's novels, especially Ivanhoe, painted castles as stages for chivalric drama, their broken walls echoing with imagined gallantry. Artists like J. M. W. Turner draped ruins in golden light, transforming military relics into objects of wistful beauty. This wasn't mere nostalgia, it was rebellion against the Industrial Revolution's smokestacks, a longing for a simpler, more heroic age that perhaps never truly existed. Then came the fairy tale Makeover. Disney's Sleeping Beauty castle, modeled after Neuschwanstein, crystallized the idea of castles as enchanted realms. Its pastel turrets and storybook proportions erased centuries of siege warfare, replacing arrow slits with twinkling stained glass. Even historical castles weren't immune. Tour guides began emphasizing ghost stories over military history, turning dungeons into theatrical sets for imagined horrors. The moat that once deterred invaders now hosted swan-shaped paddle boats. Yet this fantasy transformation wasn't entirely escapism. Castles became psychological mirrors. Hogwarts reflected our thirst for belonging. Gorming Haste our dread of stagnation. Their walls now held metaphors instead of soldiers. The locked tower as isolation, the great hall as community, the hidden passage as secrets we all keep. The alchemy was complete. What began as pragmatic architecture had become shorthand for human experience itself, proving that the strongest walls aren't made of stone, but of the stories we insist on telling about them. Modern archaeology has cracked open castle walls without lifting a single stone, revealing secrets medieval builders never imagined would be uncovered. Ground-penetrating radar paints ghostly blueprints of vanished staircases beneath parking lots, while 3D laser scanners capture every chip and groove in masonry with precision sharper than a master mason's chisel. At Kenilworth Castle, thermal imaging exposed long-buried foundations of Elizabethan pleasure gardens, their geometric patterns hidden for 4 centuries underfoot. But the real revelations come from the humblest finds a child's footprint preserved in drying mortar at Rochester, or a worn leather shoe stuffed into a wall cavity at Dover, likely placed there as a talisman against evil spirits. These aren't just artifacts, they're intimate postcards from the past, scribbled in dirt and stone. Worker graffiti tells especially poignant stories. At Conway Castle, archaeologists discovered crude sketches of sailing ships and animals etched into stone blocks by bored laborers, medieval doodles that survived kings, wars, and weather. Chemical analysis of mortar samples at Beaumaris revealed flecks of crushed seashells, proving local oyster shells were repurposed as cheap filler during construction shortages. Even discarded tools speak volumes. A broken chisel found at Caernarfon showed signs of being resharpened repeatedly until it was barely a stub, evidence of the relentless frugality that governed medieval building sites. The most revolutionary insights come from reconstructing lost techniques. By scanning the subtle tool marks on stones at Harlech, researchers recreated the exact sequence of chisel strikes used to shape blocks, a medieval signature as unique as handwriting. At Warwick Castle, soil analysis in the moat uncovered traces of willow bark and animal fat, solving the mystery of how workers waterproofed timber beams without modern sealants. Archaeology has even debunked long-held myths. Excavations at the Tower of London proved its famous Traitor's Gate was originally just a practical water entrance, later dramatized by Tudor propagandists. Perhaps no discovery humanizes castle builders more than their dietary remains. Fish bones and berry seeds found in construction camp trash pits at Bodiam reveal workers ate better than once assumed fresh river catches supplemented with foraged fruits. Butchered animal bones show precise cuts, suggesting skilled kitchen staff fed the workforce, not just scraps. At Chepstow, oyster shells piled near the stonemasons' quarters hint at a tradition of shared feasts after completing major sections. These findings shatter the image of castles as products of slave labor, instead portraying collaborative communities where craftsmanship earned respect and sometimes a decent meal. Technology continues to rewrite castle history in real time. Drones equipped with multispectral cameras recently identified vanished siege engines' burn marks on the grass at Stirling, while AI analysis of medieval account books uncovered hidden patterns in material shipments. Each scan, each soil sample, each pixelated reconstruction peels back another layer of myth, revealing the truth. Castles weren't built by fairy tales or brute force, but by ordinary people solving extraordinary problems with the tools they had. Their world lives on not just in towering walls, but in the breadcrumbs of their daily lives, now finally being gathered, piece by piece, into history's embrace. Time is the silent siege engine that never stops battering castle walls. Centuries of rain, frost, and creeping ivy have turned once proud fortresses into crumbling skeletons, their stones whispering pleas for rescue. But across Europe and beyond, a quiet army of preservationists fights back not with trebuchets and swords, but with lime mortar and patience. At Carcassonne in southern France, workers kneel on scaffolding like medieval scribes, carefully repointing weathered stones with tools indistinguishable from those used 800 years ago. The recipe for their mortar, crushed local limestone mixed with water, following manuscripts salvaged from monastery libraries. This isn't just repair work, it's time travel, where every trowel stroke bridges past and present. The challenges are staggering. Rising damp wicks moisture upward through castle walls, dissolving ancient mortar like sugar in tea. In Scotland, driving rain exploits microscopic cracks in Stirling Castle sandstone, forcing conservators to invent breathable sealants that mimic the natural oils medieval masons once used. Tourism, while vital for funding, brings its own threats. The caress of millions of hands has worn smooth the spiral stairs of Wales' Conwy Castle, necessitating replica stones swapped in like dental implants. Even well-meaning past interventions backfire. Victorian restorers who slapped cement over crumbling walls accidentally trapped moisture inside, accelerating decay until modern teams painstakingly pick the cement away, stitch by stone stitch. What's revolutionary is how preservation balances old and new. Drones equipped with thermal cameras map temperature variations in walls, pinpointing hidden voids where medieval builders cut corners. At Germany's Eltz Castle, engineers installed nearly invisible titanium rods to stabilize cracked towers, a space-age solution respecting Gothic aesthetics. But some solutions are gloriously low-tech. When Dover Castle's great tower needed repairs, craftsmen sourced oak from the same Kentish forests that supplied its original 12th century beams, seasoning the wood naturally for a decade before a single chisel touched it. The human element shines brightest. In Japan, where earthquake-resistant techniques preserve castles like Heimji, apprentices spend years mastering traditional carpentry before being allowed near historic timbers. Croatia's Dubrovnik masons mix mortar with seawater and crushed ceramic, a recipe unchanged since the 1300s, while Welsh trainees at Caernarfon learn to carve replacement stones by hand, their chisel strokes echoing those of laborers who worked under Edward I's watchful eye. These efforts aren't just about saving stones, they're safekeeping stories. When a team at Portugal's Guimarães Castle discovered 13th century charcoal sketches beneath layers of plaster, they preserved both the original and a painstaking replica for visitors. At Malta's Fort St. Angelo, conservators left a section of WW2 bullet pockmarks untouched beside restored medieval walls, layering history like pages in a book. The goal isn't freezing castles in time, but letting their scars speak while ensuring they stand long enough for future generations to listen. Perhaps the most hopeful trend is the return of castles to community stewardship. Scotland's Stirling now trains local youth in stonemasonry, while Czech crowdfunding campaigns save rural fortresses one brick at a time. From French villagers replanting castle vineyards to Ukrainian volunteers shielding medieval walls from modern artillery, preservation has become an act of defiance, proof that what unites us across centuries is stronger than what tears us apart. These stones may have been laid for kings, but their survival now belongs to us all. Edinburgh Castle's gates swing open before dawn, but the queue already snakes down the Royal Mile, tourists clutching tickets, guides adjusting microphones, children bouncing in anticipation. This scene repeats daily at castles across the world, where medieval fortresses have traded garrisons for gift shops without losing an ounce of their magnetic pull. Neuschwanstein in Germany, the fairy tale inspiration for Disney's Sleeping Beauty Castle, welcomes over 1.4 million visitors annually, its turrets framing alpine views that cameras can't resist. But what transforms these ancient strongholds into modern-day meccas isn't just their photogenic appeal, it's the alchemy of history and spectacle that keeps relevance alive 600 years after the last arrow was fired. Step inside Warwick Castle's grounds on a summer afternoon, and you're no longer a spectator, you're part of the show. Jousting tournaments unfold with thundering hooves and clanging swords. Actors in chainmail heckle the crowd with Shakespearean flair, and trebuchet demonstrations send fireballs arcing over the moat. This isn't just entertainment, it's immersive education. Studies reveal visitors retain 3 times more historical information from live interactions than static exhibits. The economics are equally compelling. A single reenactment weekend can generate enough revenue to fund months of conservation work, turning the past into both passion and paycheck. Yet some castles trade steel for spine tingles. Edinburgh's underground vaults host candlelit ghost tours where guides whisper tales of plague victims and body snatchers, while Bran Castle in Romania leans into its Dracula connections with theatrical vampire hunts. Purists may scoff, but these specters pay the bills. Bran's Halloween events alone fund structural repairs that government grants wouldn't cover. The balancing act is delicate: how to honor history while keeping doors open. At France's Carcassonne, medieval calligraphy workshops share space with VR headsets that let visitors walk through the castle's 13th century heyday, proving education doesn't have to choose between parchment and pixels. The real magic lies in how castles adapt without erasing their souls. Japan's Heimji Castle offers kimono rentals for photos against its white plastered walls, blending tradition with Instagram culture. Meanwhile, Portugal's Pina Palace hosts classical concerts in its courtyards, where the acoustics of ancient stone amplify every note. Even ruins find new purpose. Wales' Caerphilly Castle projects light shows onto its crumbling towers, transforming battle scars into canvases for digital art. What began as military investments now yield cultural dividends. Local artisans sell handmade wares in castle shadows. Cafes repurpose guardhouses into cozy nooks serving siege stew, and nearby B&Bs thrive on the tourist tide. In Scotland, castle tourism employs over 12,000 people, proving preservation isn't just about saving stones, it's about sustaining communities. The paradox is beautiful. Structures built to keep people out now exist to welcome them in, their drawbridges lowered in perpetual invitation. So the next time you cross a castle's threshold, listen closely. Beneath the clink of coffee cups and the rustle of guidebooks, you'll hear the echoes of a deal struck across time. These walls will keep sharing their stories, so long as we keep showing up to hear them. The medieval artisans who raised castles stone by stone left us more than weathered ruins. They left a blueprint for how to tackle impossible dreams. Today's architects and engineers still study their playbook, not for the exact techniques, but for the mindset that turned raw materials into legends. Consider the Burj Khalifa, a modern colossus that owes its existence to the same principles that stabilized castle towers. A wide base tapering upward, layers of reinforcement hidden beneath sleek surfaces, and meticulous attention to how wind and weight interact with height. The parallels run deeper than physics. Just as medieval builders relied on local materials, Welsh slate, Cotswold limestone, modern green architects champion regional resources, reducing carbon footprints by sourcing stone and timber from nearby quarries and forests. The past whispers that sustainability isn't innovation, it's rediscovery. But castles teach us more than structural ingenuity, they're masterclasses in collaboration. Picture a construction site where blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons worked in synchronized chaos, each trade dependent on the others. That interdependence mirrors today's skyscraper projects, where electricians, steelworkers, and glass installers follow a choreography as precise as any ballet. Medieval guilds protected trade secrets, yet shared enough to advance collective knowledge. A precursor to modern open-source engineering forums where experts worldwide troubleshoot challenges in real time. The difference, while medieval builders passed down knowledge through apprenticeships, today's teams collaborate across continents via digital blueprints. Yet the core truth remains: monumental achievements are never solo acts. the most striking lesson lies in how castle builders balanced function and artistry. Those soaring turrets weren't just defensive, they were declarations of identity, their carved gargoyles and heraldic shields serving no military purpose but elevating stone into storytelling. Modern architects like Santiago Calatrava echo this philosophy, designing bridges that resemble swans in flight and train stations that mimic forest canopies. Even in pragmatic projects like flood barriers or solar farms, designers now integrate aesthetic elements, recognizing that beauty isn't frivolous, it fosters community pride and longevity. A castle's moat might today be a rainwater harvesting system, but the principle is identical. Solutions should serve the eye as well as the need. Perhaps the most humbling insight comes from castle timelines. Projects span generations, with workers laying stones knowing they'd never see the final result. In our era of quarterly profits and rapid deliverables, that long-game patience feels radical. Yet it's precisely what's needed for challenges like climate resilience or space colonization. NASA Mars habitat prototypes draw from castle-inspired passive cooling techniques, while European cities rebuilding medieval aqueduct systems for drought preparedness acknowledge that some solutions are timeless. The real magic of castles isn't in their grandeur, it's in the quiet stubbornness of people who built for futures they'd never inhabit. So the next time you marvel at a soaring glass tower or a community-built park, look closer. You're seeing the same alchemy of grit and vision that turned quarried rock into symbols of hope. The tools have changed, but the human spirit behind them, that's as enduring as the stones of Windsor. History loves to paint castles as the work of kings and knights, but behind every towering keep and fortified wall, there were women wielding influence in ways records often overlook. Take Elena of Aquitaine, one of medieval Europe's most formidable queens. Her fingerprints are all over the castles dotting her domains. When she commissioned Fontevraud Abbey's sprawling complex, she didn't just fund its construction. She infused it with innovations like rounded kitchens and spacious scriptoria, spaces designed for communal living and learning. This wasn't vanity, it was a deliberate statement that castles could be centers of intellect and diplomacy, not just military might. Dig deeper into castle payrolls and you'll find women listed not as footnotes but as active participants. While masons and carpenters dominated the skilled trades, women appeared as mortar mixers, rope makers, and even quarry overseers. At Chepstow Castle in Wales, financial ledgers from the 13th century show payments to female labourers for hauling water and straw backbreaking work essential to keeping the construction site running. In some regions, widows of master craftsmen took over their husbands' contracts, ensuring projects continued seamlessly. Their contributions were pragmatic, not symbolic. Castles couldn't rise without the labor of entire communities, and women were the invisible mortar holding it all together. Some women didn't just build castles, they reimagined them. Isabella de Fortibus, one of medieval England's wealthiest heiresses, transformed Carisbrooke Castle into a blend of fortress and palatial residence. She added private chambers with elaborate window seats and garderobes, turning a grim stronghold into a space where power could be exercised with both authority and comfort. Over in Spain, Queen Maria de Molina supervised the construction of fortified convents, merging military practicality with spiritual refuge. These weren't whimsical renovations. They reflected a nuanced understanding of how architecture could serve multiple purposes: protection, governance, and even sanctuary. The most overlooked role, women as logistical masterminds. While lords waged wars, their wives and stewards often managed castle expansions. Matilda of Flanders, William the Conqueror's queen, coordinated the supply chains for stone shipments across the Channel during the Norman invasion, ensuring materials arrived on time despite storms and pirate raids. In Scotland, Margaret of Denmark negotiated with foreign merchants for timber and glass, her letters revealing a sharp eye for cost and quality. These women didn't just witness history, they orchestrated it from the scaffolding, their decisions etched into the very stones we admire today. What's heartbreaking is how easily their stories faded. Chroniclers praised kings for their castles but rarely mentioned the women who funded, directed, or even defended them. Archaeology is now correcting the record. At Aberystwyth Castle, excavations uncovered a silver needle in a mason's lodge, its delicate craftsmanship suggesting it belonged to a woman overseeing textile repairs for workers. In France, faded frescoes in Chinon's towers depict noblewomen inspecting blueprints with builders, a rare visual clue of their involvement. These fragments remind us that castles weren't just masculine fantasies of power. They were collaborations shaped by hands history tried to forget. The next time you walk through a castle gate, look for the subtle touches, the wider staircases that accommodated flowing gowns, the strategically placed windows that illuminated embroidery work, the chapels dedicated to female saints. These details whisper a truth the records often shout over. Women didn't just live in castles, they built them, refined them, and in doing so, redefined what strength looked like in stone. Spiritual whispers echo through castle corridors long after the last prayer faded. Far from being purely instruments of war, these fortresses were often sacred spaces where stone met scripture. Walk through the secluded chapel of Crac des Chevaliers, and you'll find delicate frescoes of saints beside arrow slits, a stark reminder that knights pledged allegiance to both sword and cross. Some castles, like Spain's Alhambra, blended military might with divine inspiration, their geometric patterns and hidden Quranic inscriptions reflecting Islamic artistry in Christian-conquered lands. Even the orientation of castle chapels wasn't arbitrary. Many align precisely eastward toward Jerusalem, their stained glass catching dawn's light to bathe altars in celestial fire. Relics transformed castles into pilgrimage sites. Dover Castle's crypt once safeguarded a fragment of the true cross, drawing devoted travelers through its formidable gates. The Tower of London's White Tower housed a holy thorn supposedly from Christ's crown, its presence turning a royal stronghold into a reliquary. These sacred objects weren't just spiritual treasures, they were political tools legitimizing a ruler's divine right to power. When Edward I built Conway Castle, he included a cathedral-like chapel with vaulted ceilings, subtly equating his reign with heavenly authority. Monastic castles reveal even deeper intersections of faith and fortification. England's Mount Grace Priory doubled as a defensive complex where Carthusian monks prayed within walls thick enough to withstand sieges. In Portugal, the Convento de Cristo merged Templar austerity with Renaissance grandeur, its round church mirroring Jerusalem's Holy Sepulchre. These hybrid structures blurred lines between sanctuary and stronghold, proving devotion and defense could share the same foundation. Celestial alignments hint at medieval builders' cosmic awareness. Wales' Raglan Castle positions its towers to frame the summer solstice sun, while Berg Eltz in Germany marks equinoxes with sunlight-piercing specific arrow loops like celestial timekeepers. Such features weren't mere decoration, they anchored castles to the rhythms of the divine, turning stone into sacred calendars. The sacred lingered even in ruin. After Henry Roman VIII dissolved England's monasteries, displaced monks often retreated to castle chapels, scratching forbidden Latin prayers into plaster. At Dunstanburgh, fishermen still avoid the singing vaults, collapsed chapel arches said to hum Gregorian chants during storms. These enduring spiritual imprints remind us that castles were never just about earthly power. They were bridges between battlements and the divine, where every cornerstone balanced the weight of swords and souls. Medieval castles didn't conquer the landscape, they conversed with it. Builders understood something we're only rediscovering today. True sustainability isn't about dominating nature, but collaborating with it. Take the placement of Welsh castles like Harlech, perched on glacial rock outcrops. This wasn't just defensive genius, it was geological harmony. The natural elevation provided sturdy foundations while minimizing the need to level terrain, saving backbreaking labor and preserving the ecosystem. Even the stone itself was sourced from nearby cliffs, reducing transport emissions centuries before carbon footprints were measured. Modern laser scans of these quarries reveal something astonishing. Medieval workers extracted rock along natural fracture lines, following the Earth's own blueprint to minimize waste and effort. Passive climate control turned castles into early green buildings. Thick stone walls acted as thermal batteries, absorbing daytime heat to warm interiors at night, while strategic window placements created natural ventilation currents. In Spain's scorching plains, castles like Almodovar del Rio incorporated shaded inner courtyards with reflecting pools that cooled air before it circulated through living spaces, a primitive but effective form of air conditioning. Meanwhile, Scottish tower houses used turf roofs for insulation, their living blankets of moss and wildflowers regulating temperatures better than modern asphalt. Archaeologists at Dover Castle recently discovered remnants of wool-stuffed wall cavities, proving medieval builders understood insulating principles we now associate with energy-efficient design. Water management showcases even more innovation. Rainwater cascading off castle roofs wasn't wasted, it funneled through elaborate gutter systems into cisterns, some lined with naturally filtering limestone to purify the supply. At Malta's Mdina, underground channels directed runoff to replenish the water table, while French castles like Carcassonne used angled paving stones to silently guide water away from foundations without modern drainage pipes. Even moats served ecological purposes beyond defense. Many doubled as aquaculture ponds stocked with fish, their nutrient-rich waters later used to fertilize castle gardens in a closed-loop system that would impress today's permaculturists. The real surprise, medieval builders practiced adaptive reuse long before it became a sustainability buzzword. Roman ruins weren't just plundered for ready-cut stone. Their marble columns became cornerstones, their broken statues mortar filler. At Hadrian's Wall, forts were repurposed into Norman strongholds, their foundations strengthened with recycled rubble. This wasn't mere frugality. It reflected a worldview where resources were precious and nothing was truly disposable. Modern science is now quantifying these ancient techniques. Thermal imaging shows how castle wall thickness varies by orientation, thinner on sun-facing sides to absorb warmth, thicker on northern exposures to retain it. Hydrologists marvel at how Welsh castles like Caernarfon channeled natural springs through hidden conduits, creating gravity-fed water systems without pumps. Perhaps most remarkably, studies of castle gardens reveal companion planting techniques we now recognize as pest-repellent roses grown near vegetable patches to deter aphids, lavender bordering grain stores to ward off moths. These weren't crude structures imposed on the land, but dialogues with it. When a French lord insisted on building his shade atop unstable clay, medieval engineers didn't force the issue. They floated the foundation on a grid of oak piles, letting the structure shift with the earth like a tree bending in wind. That same flexibility defines their legacy today. As we face climate challenges, these ancient solutions whisper across centuries. Sometimes the greenest technology isn't the newest invention, but the wisdom we forgot. The next time you see a castle silhouette against the sky, look closer. Those weathered stones aren't just history, they're a field guide to living lightly on this planet. Castles weren't just built to withstand sieges, they were engineered to dominate minds. Step through a castle's gatehouse, and you're immediately plunged into a carefully choreographed psychological theater. Those towering walls, they weren't merely thick, they were deliberately disproportionate, their sheer scale shrinking visitors into insignificance before they even crossed the threshold. Architects understood a fundamental truth: power isn't just held, it's staged. The approach to a fortress like Wales' Caernarfon Castle forced visitors to traverse a narrow, winding path beneath walls studded with arrow slits, each one a silent reminder that unseen eyes could strike at any moment. This wasn't just defense, it was a masterclass in spatial intimidation where every step heightened the sense of vulnerability. Light became a weapon of control. Great halls bathed in flickering torchlight drew eyes upward to vaulted ceilings, reinforcing the social hierarchy through architecture. Meanwhile, windowless corridors like those in Scotland's Craigmillar Castle plunged intruders into disorienting darkness, their uneven steps echoing ominously to betray their position. Some castles employed murmur holes, tiny openings in vaulted ceilings that amplified whispers from rooms below, turning gossip into surveillance. The chapel at Dover Castle demonstrates another clever trick. Its stained glass windows positioned so morning light would illuminate the altar precisely during Mass, creating a divine spotlight that linked spiritual authority with the Lord's temporal power. Acoustics played equally manipulative roles. Spiral staircases weren't just space, saving their clockwise ascent gave right-handed defenders the upper hand while causing attackers' swords to clang against the central column. At Chepstow Castle, the Great Hall's barrel vaulted ceiling acted like a stone megaphone, carrying the Lord's voice effortlessly to the far corners while forcing others to strain forward to be heard. Even echoes were weaponized. The elongated passages of Berg Eltz in Germany create unnatural reverberations, making approaching footsteps sound eerily closer than they were, a built-in early warning system that preyed on primal fears. The psychology extended to symbolic details. Heraldic beasts carved above doorways transformed entrances into metaphorical gullets, forcing visitors to literally pass beneath the jaws of power. Portcullises weren't merely functional, their iron teeth mirrored the castle's metaphorical readiness to bite. Even decorative elements served double duty. The delicate tracery in Conway Castle's royal apartments wasn't just beautiful, it filtered sunlight into shifting patterns that subtly unsettled, preventing guests from ever feeling fully at ease. Modern experiments reveal how effective these tactics were. VR recreations of castle spaces show elevated heart rates and subconscious posture changes in participants when exposed to features like sudden narrow passages or asymmetrical sightlines. The true genius lies in how these manipulations weren't overt threats but ambient suggestions, a language of stone that bypassed reason to speak directly to the lizard brain. Whether through forced perspectives that made keeps appear taller or carefully placed shadows that concealed defensive preparations, castles didn't just house power, they performed it in an endless stone ballet designed to make submission feel inevitable. What's most fascinating is how these techniques still resonate today. From government buildings with imposing staircases to corporate lobbies that funnel visitors through controlled sightlines, the legacy of castle psychology lives on. The next time you feel awed by architecture, ask yourself, are you responding to beauty or to a primal script written by medieval masters of the mind? In the quiet forests of Burgundy, France, the rhythmic clang of iron on stone echoes not from some long-lost medieval site, but from a 21st century construction zone where history is being remade by hand. Gatehouse Castle isn't a restoration, it's a radical experiment in time travel, where modern builders wield 13th century tools to raise an entirely new fortress from scratch. Every stone is quarried on-site with iron wedges, every timber hand hewn with axes, every roof tile molded from local clay and fired in wood-burning kilns. This isn't just historical reenactment. It's a living laboratory where forgotten techniques are being resurrected through trial, error, and the occasional splinter. What makes Gatehouse revolutionary isn't just the authenticity. It's the revelations emerging from the process. When builders attempted to recreate a medieval treadwheel crane using only period illustrations, they discovered its wooden gears required precise moisture levels to function smoothly, explaining why historical accounts mention cranes being covered with wet hides during dry spells. The castle's blacksmith, working without modern bellows, rediscovered how medieval forges used carefully angled wind tunnels to naturally amplify airflow. Even the mortar has become a detective story, with experiments showing crushed pottery shards long dismissed as filler actually strengthen the mix by reacting chemically with lime over time. These aren't theoretical discoveries, they're tangible solutions emerging from calloused hands and mud-spattered notebooks. The project's true genius lies in its constraints. Using only materials found within a 3-mile radius, Gatehouse team has uncovered how medieval builders turned local limitations into advantages. The forest's oak trees, when split along their natural grain, produce planks more resistant to warping than modern milled lumber. The site's clay-rich soil, initially seen as a nuisance, became the key to crafting durable roof tiles when mixed with specific amounts of sand. Even the castle's slow construction pace, averaging just 3 feet of wall per year, has revealed an unexpected benefit. Allowing mortar to cure naturally produces stronger bonds than modern quick-dry mixes. Beyond France, similar experiments are rewriting architectural history. In Arkansas, Ozark medieval fortress builders stumbled upon a game-changing realization when reconstructing a trebuchet. The counterweight's release timing affects accuracy more than its size, explaining why medieval accounts emphasized skilled operators over sheer mass. Meanwhile, Germany's Campus Galley project, constructing a Carolingian monastery, has demonstrated how simple rope-making techniques create cords stronger than many synthetic alternatives when treated with beeswax. These projects collectively prove that what we once dismissed as primitive methods were often sophisticated adaptations to material and environmental realities. The human element is equally transformative. Gatehouse stonemasons report developing an almost tactile connection to their materials after years of hand carving, able to detect a stone's internal flaws by the sound of their chisel strikes. Carpenters working exclusively with axes and adzes find their muscle memory aligning uncannily with illustrations in medieval manuals. Even visitors contribute to the rediscovery. A chance observation by a child led to the correct reconstruction of a forgotten mortar mixing technique involving dance-like footwork to achieve the perfect consistency. These modern castle builders are doing more than reconstructing walls, they're dismantling assumptions. Every blistered hand and broken tool at Gatehouse chips away at the myth that medieval construction was crude or haphazard. Instead, a picture emerges of resourcefulness so precise that a master mason could calculate a vault's curvature using nothing but a string and stake, or a carpenter could join beams with wooden pegs that outlast iron nails. The stones rising at these sites carry more than weight. They bear witness to an era when human ingenuity turned local earth into enduring majesty, one patient stroke at a time. As we step back from these stone giants, we see not just fortresses, but monuments to human tenacity. Each castle is a testament to the hands that shaped it and the hope that sustained it, proof that even the grandest dreams can be built, one stone at a time. Their legacy endures, reminding us that collaboration and vision can create wonders that outlast centuries. If these walls could talk, they'd tell us to keep building, keep hoping, and keep reaching for the extraordinary. But the true magic lies in how these ancient structures still speak to us across the ages. They challenge our modern obsession with speed and disposability, showing what's possible when craftsmanship isn't measured in deadlines but in generations. A mason shaping a block at Gatehouse today feels the same resistance in the stone as his medieval counterpart, the same satisfaction when the chisel finds the perfect angle. That unbroken thread of skill and patience is their real gift to us, not just towers and turrets but a mindset. Castles also whisper a quiet warning. Their ruins remind us that no power is permanent, no wall unbreachable. The same fortresses built to intimidate now welcome tourists with open gates, their arrow slits framing Instagram photos instead of enemy troops. Time has a way of smoothing even the sharpest symbols of dominance into shared heritage. Perhaps that's their final lesson. What begins as an instrument of control can, through sheer persistence of stone and story, become something far greater, a bridge between past and present, between the people who built them and the people who marvel at them now. So the next time you see a castle, whether on a misty hillside or glowing on your screen, pause for more than a photo. Trace a finger along its weathered grooves and feel the echoes of 1,000 forgotten choices. The quarryman's strike, the mason's sigh, the child placing a wildflower in the mortar as a secret blessing. These stones don't just belong to history, they belong to everyone who still believes that ordinary hands can shape extraordinary things. Their message couldn't be clearer. If rock and resolve could raise these giants against all odds, what might we build together